Okay. Namaste and a very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all on behalf of the Indian section for today's study on the Mahatma letters. Let us begin the session by the universal invocation. Please join me in the universal invocation. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. So welcome back. Today we will be studying Mahatma letter number 2, and this study will be taken by none other than Brother Shikhar Agnihotri, who is very well known, most loved and most respected by almost everyone. So before we begin the session, let me give a brief introduction about Brother Shikharji. He is a Bachelor of Science in Nautical Science, which he has done from the Mumbai University. And by profession, he was formerly in the shipping industry. He took a voluntary retirement after working for 10 years. Then he joined the Theosophical Society in 2008, and he came in touch with the Theosophical Society due to his mother, whom we all know, Mrs. Vasumati Agnihotri, who is a long-standing member of the society since 1980s. He was very active in the Theosophical Society. He was a founder member and the assistant secretary of Pragya Lodge in Lucknow. He was also the founder member and secretary of the Maitri TOS group in Lucknow. Then he became the national lecturer of the Indian section of the Theosophical Society for the past 4 years. And he conducted various camps, seminars, youth camps, and gave public lectures on theosophical subjects. And also on holistic health all over India and in many theosophical lodges, schools, and universities. His articles have been published in the Theosophist, in the Indian Theosophist, and in Wake Up India, in French and Spanish theosophical magazines. He has contributed many articles for books which are published on mysticism and corona. Now he is the international speaker for the Theosophical Society for the past 2 years, and he has delivered many lectures all over the world globally. He has also started this YouTube channel called Pragya CS Studio, with which all of us are familiar. It was started in May 2020 with his wife Catalina to make these theosophical teachings accessible to as many people as possible. At present, Brother Shikharji is volunteering at the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society in Adyar at Chennai. So with these words, I welcome Shikharji to take us through this study of Mahatma letter number 2. Shikharji.
Thank you, Vivaji, for a lovely introduction, and thank you, Mahapatraji and Indian section for giving this opportunity to share some of the aspects of the study session that we are going to take today. I would like to begin with paying our reverence to those elder brethren whom we know as masters, Mahatmas, or the Guru, principle, which is everywhere in nature. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. सभी आत्मीय बंधुओं को सादर प्रणाम। Hearty greetings and good wishes to everyone from Adyar on this auspicious occasion of Dev Deepavali, as we know it. And there is a story behind it, why it is celebrated. And it's quite a good thing that we are doing this sort of study on this day to come in touch with the light that we all have within. So the subject for today's study is the letter number 2, which is actually same, the number 2 letter, whether it is in the book by A.T. Barker or in the chronological sequence by Vicente Hauchin Jr. In both the books, it is numbered as letter number 2. And this letter was received at Shimla on 19th October 1880 from Master KH. And there is an interesting incident attached to this day that will be taken up maybe in the next letter, but just to give all a hint, that on the very night of this 19th October 1880, when this letter was received, Sinnett was visited by Master KH in his astral form. Because as we all know, this is just the second letter in the series of letters that were received over a period of many years. And the communication was just beginning to set up. And A.P. Sinnett was really very curious to get in personal touch with the Mahatmas or the elder brothers about whom he heard so much from Madame Blavatsky. So, fulfilling his wish, that wish of Mr. A.P. Sinnett, Master T.H. visited him the very same night, which to him seemed a dream or a vision. But later on, with the way of an evidence in the next letter, if we study that at some time, how he proved that he really visited him at that place. So in letter number 2, in today's session, the key points that we will come across as a student of theosophy or an aspirant or someone who is trying to walk this path. Patience is a necessary, I would say, okay, it's some people may call it virtue, but actually it may be a consequence of our study and approach to life that patience is developed, because until unless it has a foundation, the patience can anytime turn into impatience. The spirit of inquiry that we'll come across, brave declaration of principles, how, of course, all these are some of the key takeaways, key points for us to think over, contemplate over, and try to apply in our life. Brave declaration of principles, how a person who is really aspiring to walk on this path must be. Inner motive. Motive itself is an inner thing which is not visible most of the times to somebody else, but inner motive, we will come across that sometimes our motives are not, even we are not aware of our motives. They are operating from such a depth in our mind, which we may call subconscious or unconscious mind, that even we are not aware sometimes of our motive until and unless we are aware of them, and or later on, if we do the analysis why we did something, what could have been the reason, then we can come across those inner motives of which the master talks about in this letter. Another great ideal of self-service, selfless service and not personal gratification. That a lot of work of service goes on in the world in the form of individual service or in the form of organizations, NGOs. But what is the one significant point or thing is there which makes that service tainted? And that taint is of selfishness that we'll come across. Humility, that since this was the beginning of the long-term relationship, to learn something of the Eastern esoteric philosophy. So when we approach such a subject or such a master, humility, or whenever we want to learn, we must be humble, and when we learn it, we should be even humbler. And the last of it, of course, of this session, that we must be aware of our motives all the time in our daily life. That would help us a lot in purifying and cleaning our, what we call in the golden stairs, a clean life, an open heart. So once we are begin to be aware of our motives, we can actually work upon them. Now we come to the letter itself, and in the beginning of most of the letters, there are some notes. The notes are from Virginia Hansen, who made a study of Mahatma letters. So she gives a little bit of preface of this letter, that the first letter that was received from the Master KH was written from Toling Monastery, which is at a relatively short distance over the border in Tibet. And Toling Monastery is the oldest monastery in the Nangri prefecture of Western Tibet, and it is situated in Toling near the Indian border of Ladakh. In Tibetan language, Toling means hovering in the sky forever, which can also, although she writes that it gives us a meaning on the physical sense that it is reflected by the location of the monastery at an elevation of 12,400 feet. But also in the inner world, if we see that the height of consciousness, if one reaches, that is an inner sanctum of one's consciousness, which is at a lofty height. When the second letter was written or precipitated, Master KH had already left Toling Monastery and was somewhere in the Kashmir Valley on his way to consult with the Mahachohan about a letter he had received from A.O. Hume. Now, this is also an important thing, that when both A.P. Sinnett and A.O. Hume came to know about the Mahatmas and the brotherhood from HPB and Colonel Olcott, both of them got very motivated and full of enthusiasm to contact the brotherhood with their own motives. So both of them wrote letters to the masters, which were transmitted to them by HPB. But the answer to those letters were given separately, individually, to A.O. Hume and A.P. Sinnett, because in this letter itself, the master will say, since the motive of both of them, A.P. Sinnett and A.O. Hume, was different, so that is why he has to write a separate answer to A.O. Hume. And that letter is the letter that Master KH wrote to A.O. Hume. Is really, I mean, I am not sure whether we have read it in this series of studies that we have conducted here, but that is also a really very important letter to A.O. Hume, which includes a lot of dimensions which are very useful as for anybody who is who wants to know something more of how the brotherhood works. So, but before answering to that letter, because there were a couple of proposals in that letter, Master had to discuss them with the Mahachohan, and therefore he was on his way to consult with the Mahachohan. And as explained by A.P. Sinnett in his book, The Occult World, Hume had read the first letter from the Mahatma and, becoming enthused with the possibilities of such a correspondence, decided to write to Master K.H. himself. In that letter, I just said, he offered, the proposal that he made was to give up everything and go into seclusion if, and if you can see a big capitalized if, only, that is not in the original letter, that's only just to highlight some point, only he could be trained in occultism so that he could return to the world and demonstrate its realities. So in the first look, it sounds like a very genuine proposal that yes, I'm ready to give up everything and I can go and live in Tibet in some monastery without food, or with minimum bare necessities, if only I can be trained in occultism so that I would return to the world and demonstrate its realities. To a worldly mind, it seems like a very normal gesture, normal proposal, but in that response, what Master gives, he has explained why this is a selfish proposal. And when we begin to learn something, when we begin to do something, we cannot put conditions to it. That I am giving up everything if I am assured of that, then actually that is not giving at all, because I am still in that frame of mind that wants security. And maybe in turn, I want something from myself, that I would return to the world as a savior and who shows the world the realities of occult mysteries. So that letter was the reply to A.O. After receiving the Mahatma's first letter, Mr. Sinnett wrote to him again, saying in effect that the European mind was less difficult than Master K.H. had represented it in his first letter. And again, A.P. Sinnett is also doing the same, setting forth some of the terms under which he would be willing to work for the cause of the Master. Again, we see that actually it is very understandable that coming from the European mindset or relatively Western mindset from India, this is a very normal approach, that when you are starting cooperation or coordination or coming together with somebody, you set forth some terms or conditions under which you would be willing to work. And he also made a suggestion, which he and Mr. Hume themselves has devised, that a separate branch of Theosophical Society should be formed to be called Anglo-Indian branch, which will not be subject in any way to HPB on Colonel Olcott, but connected directly with the Brotherhood, with the Mahatmas giving their instructions and teachings directly to the members of that branch. And it seems that Hume also, in his letter to the Mahatma, had argued for this suggestion. But later on, as we studied, this suggestion was not approved, and instead another branch was formed, Shimla Eclectic Theosophical Society, but it was still under the mother society of Theosophical Society, and only members of TS could be members of those societies. So this was a preface to the letter, and coming to the letter itself, Master writes, "Much esteemed sir and brother, although even in this letter we'll come across that when maybe A.P. Sinnett or A.O. Hume addressed Masters, they must have addressed him by his first name. But as we see, which may be their culture, but I think a normal courtesy, even when Mahatma is writing in his letters, these are like very small things to be taken, that he being at such a high level of consciousness or evolution, state of evolution, when he is addressing us or anybody, someone, a pupil, he is using such respected words, that much esteemed sir and brother, we will be at cross purposes. He's saying, if we are big, since we are beginning our correspondence now, and if in the beginning itself we don't make it very clear that occult science itself also has its own methods of research, which are sometimes very fixed and sometimes arbitrary, just as the methods of its opposite, physical science, are in their own way. If he does not make it very clear, then their paths will be, they will be at the crossroads. So just like he's saying, the physical science has its rule or law, so also has the occult science. And this, keep in mind, he's saying in response to the proposal, to the terms and conditions proposed by AP Synod. And he is saying that he who would cross the boundary of the unseen world can no more prescribe how he will proceed than the traveler who tries to penetrate to the inner subterranean recesses of Lhasa. It's just like I am going to a new city or a new country or a completely different place, and there is a guide to take me around. And upon reaching there, I start to argue with the guide that I will be the one who will set the conditions and terms, how will we move around. That is quite illogical. So similarly, he is saying and putting it right in the beginning that a person who is aspiring to cross the boundary of the unseen world beyond physical cannot prescribe how they will proceed, because of course, I mean, there is no experience, and the person who is ready there to guide, they have to follow their instructions. The mysteries never were and can never can be put within the reach of the general public, not at least until that longed for day when our religious philosophy becomes universal. And this is a very contentious point. I think it's the human mind at this stage of evolution, not to blame entirely A.O. Hume or A.P. Synod. Even suppose today, if we get to see a miracle or a phenomena, there will be a tendency of the mind to, to want that phenomena to propagate the philosophy of theosophy, or we would be like naturally inclined to know what is behind it. But when the master says that mysteries never were and never can be put within the reach of general public, and when many of the times people ask, why don't, there are phenomena and why masters stop communicating, why letters are not coming anymore, or when AP Synod and he was asking for a phenomena. Phenomena means something miracle, but master is refusing. We don't see it at a we don't see it in a larger view, but what he says in the first letter, that we work by natural and not supernatural means for the master it is not a miracle, it is just plain science. But as on the one hand, science would find it itself unable in its present state to account for the wonders given its name, because we will call it occult science, but the science, the physical science, cannot explain it. And on the other hand, the ignorant masses would still be left to view the phenomena in the light of a miracle. So the ignorant people, those who do not know anything, they will just think of it as miracle and start worshipping the person who is doing it, as it always happens. Everyone who would thus be made a witness to the occurrence would be thrown off his balance, and the results would be deplorable. Now, this is a very good example of or the point that Master is making, that neither by doing the phenomena, the science would not be able to explain it, and the ignorant people will take it as miracle. So we will throw off balance, both the sides. And when we do this, we know also that there is the law of retribution, law of karma in nature. So that will try to make this balance back. And in that process, then the results, the consequences would be deplorable, that he is saying. And because we all know that law of retribution will work its way through. And that is why also in the previous letters we read that the founders were told not to make the names of the Mahatmas public, but only to share their philosophy. But in their enthusiasm, they shared their name, they made it public, and that is why inviting a lot of unnecessary scandals, criticisms, and other obstacles in their path. And that is why Mahatma also says that the world's prejudices have to be conquered step by step, not at a rush. We can not just suddenly think that today or tomorrow there will be an utopia and everything will be resolved. No, there is a step-by-step process for which again we need patience. And he says, at no time have more than a scarcely appreciable minority of men possessed nature's secrets. Means it's not that earlier in the Satyug or other yugas, there will be like innumerable adepts. He's saying that at no time have more than a scarcely appreciable minority of men possessed nature's secrets. So there have always been this Siddha Sangha, or the brotherhood of the adepts, which is always in minority, limited in numbers, who are working their way through within the limits of karma to guide the evolution in a less harmful way, because as we read in Voice of Silence, there is a guardian wall which protects from further damage to mankind, because they say man is man. We don't know what are the limits to which a man's psyche can go down and cause harm. So although these adepts have been in minority, but multitudes, many people have witnessed the practical evidences of the possibility of their possession. And I think we have the experience also, like if we take Lord Krishna also as an adept, as he was an avatar also, but he also showed a couple of times the powers, but of course for a particular purpose, when he showed his Vishwarupa to Arjuna, or when he went for the peace talks with talking to the Dhritarashtra, and also later one time. So there were particular times when he showed, but not for general public. And why is it so that they are always in a minority, the adepts? Is because the adept is the rare efflorescence of a generation of inquirers. Means it is like we say that about the flower of Parijat, that there is a Parijat, perhaps the flower of which blooms in I don't know how many years. I don't have exact time for that. But there are certain sorts of flowers which blossom very rarely, and it is thought auspicious that when such a flower is blossomed, you visit it and you pay your reverence to it, or get some blessings from it. Because the rare efflorescence means the action of process of developing or unfolding, like blossoming. So becoming an adept is also a process of blossoming of a generation of inquirers. Like it's not generation of humanity, but inquirer. First of all, among humanity, how many are the real inquirers of these things? And out of those inquirers, out of their generation, once in a while, someone is blossomed, when the voice of silence says, a master has risen, a master of the day. But to become one, what that individual must do? He must obey the inward impulse of his soul, irrespective of the prudential considerations of worldly science or sagacity. And I think that is always the instruction for a person who is walking or trying to walk on this path, to follow their heart. Because most of the times, what we call as worldly science or worldly judgment or worldly intelligence or worldly manner or worldly way of living is quite opposite or antagonistic to the inner journey. And that is very obvious if we see around. If we are clever, if I am ambitious, and if I am ruthless in my approach to achieving my targets, I may very well become a very famous, powerful, wealthy, rich person in the world, in the eyes of the world. But in the inner world, in my inner eyes, I may not be able to even face the mirror in which I see myself. So that is why, because a lot of conditioning and social pressure is there on us unconsciously. Sometimes we think we are free from it, but we are not actually really sure until and unless that situation comes, and then we have to take a decision. Then we come to know how deeply such conditionings or prejudices are there, deep-rooted conditionings are there, and we have, the person who wishes to walk this path has to overcome all those prudential considerations. From the way of the world, it will be very prudential. Otherwise, any peasant wouldn't be hiring a murderer person to be her chef, who has come out of, who has served his imprisonment, who has come out of the jail. It will be very imprudent to hire such a person, or similar such cases that we come across. Or it will be very imprudent for Buddha to walk through the jungle when the Angulimal is on his search to cut the final fingers, completing his garland of 1,000 fingers. But that is how it is supposed to be. And for that, it is what is required is self-confidence. Self-confidence not of the things that we say are the self-confidence that we get with money or power outside, but self-confidence which is based on our inner self and the courageousness to stand alone, even though the whole world may be against us, but the inner belief, the self-belief that what I am doing is right. Of course, one must be open to constructive criticism, to look at what I am doing, to look at all the critical aspects, and then arrive at such a decision, not being stubborn on the other side. So what Master tells him, that your desire is to be brought to communicate with one of us directly, without the agency of either Madame Blavatsky or any other medium. That's what they were, AP Senate and AOVM were proposing, that we don't want, and that is also another prejudice if we see, that why, if Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott are already doing this, what is the point in bypassing them? Because maybe they thought, being of European descent, they are some way, I don't know, that is just a thought, that they may be superior to a Russian lady or an American person, or some other sorts of prejudice. Maybe they want self-importance, that we want to be that channel, we want to be that messenger to bring that hidden philosophy to the world. Your idea would be, as I understand it, to obtain such communications either by letters or by audible words, so as to be guided by one of us in the management and principally in the instruction of the society, what they were proposing as Anglo-Indian Philosophical Society. Master says, you seek all this, and yet, as you say yourself, hitherto you have not found sufficient reasons to even give up your modes of life directly hostile to such modes of communications. In these letters, it's very wonderful to read them every now and then, that whenever the master says something, he backs it up with a very common sense logic. And here also he's saying the same thing, that APC, that you are asking so many things from us, that you be the without any medium, direct communication, letters, but until you also say on the other hand that you have not found sufficient reasons to even give up your way of life, which includes eating non-veg food, alcohol, or smoking. These are only physical limitations. Beyond that are the prejudices and the conditionings that the person has, APCNet or AOU has. They are the more important barriers in communicating with the masters. That's why he says directly hostile to such modes of communications. Because to communicate directly with the masters, of course, there is some sort of physical magnetism that is required, but also a lot of the person's magnetism in the sense of his psyche, that how open and reverence, with full of reverence the person has towards the master. And he's very directly telling him that. So he's saying this is hardly reasonable what you're asking for, because he who would lift the high banner of mysticism and proclaim its reign near at hand must give the example to others. If you are so enthusiastic of bringing that esoteric knowledge to the world, you should be leading by example, as we all know HPB and Colonel Olcott did. We all know how many hardships HPB and Colonel Olcott went through before they were contacted by the masters to be these light bringers. So that's what he's asking. If you want to be that, you must be the first to change your modes of life. And regarding the study of occult mysteries, knowledge must loudly proclaim it such, despite exact science and the opposition of the society. This is also a hint for many of the students like us, or for many other people, that if you really believe in something on the basis of facts, evidence, and logic, we should not shy away from declaring them in any appropriate forum which we think would be useful for the propagation of such for such philosophy. Because if we are really enthusiastic, we should, because we don't feel shy when we have to do some other things. So why should one be timid about declaring the principles that one believes? And that is why brave declaration of principles are utterly necessary from the person walking on this path. And that's why when he says the kingdom of heaven is obtained by force, says the Christian mystics, it is but with the armed hand and ready to either conquer or perish that the modern mystic can hope to achieve his object. By force, kingdom of heaven is obtained by force, but force of what? Force of love and compassion, humility. That's what Jesus says, that not a person who is always saying, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but that he that does the will of my Father, which is in heaven, that is our higher self. When we begin to manifest love, compassion, wisdom in our daily life, then we become armed with those virtues. So he says, my first answer covered, I believe, most of the questions contained in your second and even third letter, having then expressed there my opinion that the world in general was unripe for any too staggering proof of occult power that we discussed in the beginning, that what it can do, it can throw people off balance. So there but remains to deal with the isolated individuals who seek, like yourself, to penetrate behind the veil of matter into the world of primal causes. That is, we need only consider how the cases of yourself and Mr. Hume. And he says that this gentleman also has done me the great honor to address me by name, offering to me a few questions and stating the conditions upon which he would be willing to work for us seriously. But your motives and aspirations being of diametrically opposite character than of Hume, and hence leading to different results, I must reply to each of you separately. So that's why a separate answer to Hume and Sinnett. Now he comes, what is this motive? The first and chief consideration in determining us to accept or reject your offer lies in the inner motive which propels you to seek out instructions, and in a certain sense, our guidance. The guidance in all cases under reserve, he says, as I understand it, and therefore remaining a question independent of anything else. So this is a very loud and clear message for everyone, that whatever we are doing, if we really want an assistance and help, a push from spiritual beings or divinity, it all depends on the inner motive. And that may be a hint also, that many times we say that the prayers of children are heard because their motives, most of the times, generally, until and unless they have developed the sense of egoistic thing, they are to a large extent very innocent when doing a prayer, and many times it is answered because their motives are pure. So now he is telling, what are your motives? I may try to define them in general aspect, leaving details for further considerations. So Master explains in a tabulated form that your desire is to receive positive and unimpeachable proofs. That is, nobody can deny them, that there really are forces in nature of which science knows nothing. Like, that's why he has proposed a phenomena that you make appear the one newspaper which was to be printed in Europe and India at the same time, the Indian copy and the European copy. So that would be a proof in itself that there are forces of which science knows nothing. But another thing, the hope to appropriate them someday, that is, those powers, you wish to have them someday, sooner the better, because you don't like to wait, so as to enable yourself to demonstrate their existence to a few chosen Western minds, to contemplate future life as an objective reality built upon the rock of knowledge, not of faith, and to finally learn, which is most important among all your motives, perhaps, which is also the most occult and the best guarded, to finally learn the whole truth about our lodges and ourselves, that is the White Brotherhood. So these are the motives pointed out by the Master, to get, in short, the positive assurance that the brothers, of whom everyone hears so much and sees so little, are real entities, and maybe at the very same night, for this very same purpose, the Master KH visited A.P. Sinnett in his astral form, just to give him an evidence that these are not fictions of a discorded, hallucinated brain. And such, viewed in their best light, appear to us your motives for addressing them. And in the same spirit do I answer them, hoping that my sincerity will not be interpreted in a wrong way or attributed to anything like an unfriendly spirit. And we all know that he's answering like that. But what he now comes to finally say is, to our minds, these motives although sincere and worthy of every serious consideration from the worldly standpoint, as we discussed, that from the worldly standpoint, it is very obvious, very appropriate, very normal. But to us, it appears selfish. And he says that you have to pardon me what you might view as crudeness of language, if you desire really is that which you profess, to learn truth and get instruction from us, who belong to quite a different world from the one you move in. Because they are selfish, because you must be aware that the chief object of the TS is not so much to gratify individual aspirations as to serve our fellow. So the purpose of the TS has never been to give certain individuals certain quick initiations and some powers so that they can demonstrate to the world, but to serve humanity. And the real value of this term selfish, which may jar upon your ear, which means which may hurt your ear, has a peculiar significance with us, which it cannot have with you. And therefore, to begin with, he says, you must not accept it otherwise than in our sense. Perhaps you will better appreciate our meaning when told. Now he is telling why it is like that. That in our view, the highest aspirations for the welfare of humanity become tainted with selfishness if the mind of the philanthropist, there lurks the shadow of desire for self-benefit or a tendency to do injustice when these exist unconsciously to himself. Very clear hint, very clear instruction, which also happens that service in itself is not sufficient. That's why it is called selfless service. Because if we are doing service and we have some expectations in return, then either we say that it is not service, in fact, or as Master says, that it becomes tainted with the selfishness. And it is not that when this expectation that we are conscious of it, even what we discussed in the beginning, that this expectation can be so deep rooted that we don't even realize it until and unless we are put in that situation. We are totally unconscious of it, but when that situation comes, then we realize of this expectation in us, that too when we become aware of it. And that is the reason he says that the motives, your motives are selfish. That's why we cannot go through it in the manner that you are proposing. How this communication goes further, we will see in the next session of this letter. And we have covered about half of it. And I would request Meenakshi ji to share it in Hindi.
Meenakshi is not there.
Okay.
She sent a video that I will share.
Sir, volume can be increased.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
It's not here.
It's not audible, sir.
आवाज नहीं आ रही जी.
That is the maximum she has given to us.
मास्टर्स के लिए काम करने के लिए तैयार था और तैयार किया हुआ सुझाव मास्टर्स को देते हैं कि टीएस की एक अलग शाखा बनाई जानी चाहिए जिसे एंग्लो इंडियन शाखा यह नाम हो, जो किसी भी तरह से एचपीबी और कर्नल ऑलकॉट के अधीन नहीं होनी चाहिए, बल्कि सीधे महात्मा गणों से जुड़ी हो और महात्मा के सदस्यों को उपदेश और शिक्षण दे। मास्टर सीनेट से कहते हैं,
Mahapatra ji, sorry, unmute yourself.
हाँ,
Okay.
व्यवहार परस्पर विरोधी उद्देश्यों में होगी। जैसे भौतिक विज्ञान के अपने नियम होते हैं, वैसे गूढ़ विज्ञान के अपने सिद्धांत होते हैं। वह जो अनदेखे जगत की सीमा रेखा को पार करेगा, वह यह नहीं बता सकता कि वह उस यात्री की तुलना में कैसे आगे बढ़ेगा जो पवित्र लासा की भूमिगत भीतरी खाइयों में प्रवेश करने की कोशिश में अपने गाइड को रास्ता दिखा सकता है। गूढ़ ज्ञान के रहस्य आम जनता की पहुंच में न तो कभी थे और न ही रहेंगे, तब तक नहीं जब तक उसकी उत्कटता न हो, जब हमारा पवित्र तत्वज्ञान विश्वव्यापी हो जाए। आगे मास्टर कहते हैं, किसी भी काल में प्रकृति के रहस्यों से अवगत होने वाले ऐसे बहुत ही कम उल्लेखनीय मनुष्य थे। हालांकि इन रहस्यों के संभावित वास्तविकता के प्रमाण की बहुसंख्यक लोग साक्षी थे। जिज्ञासुओं के श्रेणी की एक दुर्लभ अभिव्यक्ति यानी जीवन मुक्त सिद्ध पुरुष, और इसे बनने के लिए उसे सांसारिक विज्ञान या दूरदर्शिता के विवेकपूर्ण विचारों के बावजूद अपनी आत्मा के आंतरिक प्रेरणा का पालन करना होगा। आपकी इच्छा है कि हम महात्माओं में से एक आपके साथ मैडम ब्लेवेट्स्की या किसी भी अन्य माध्यम के बिना प्रत्यक्ष रूप से संवाद साधे। जैसा कि मैं समझ पाया हूँ, आपका यह विचार होगा कि ऐसा संपर्क हम में से एक के द्वारा आपको सोसाइटी के संचालन नीति और मुख्यतः उपदेशों को या तो हमारे पत्रों के माध्यम से या मौखिक रूप से होने चाहिए। यह सब चाहते हुए भी आप स्वयं यह कहते हैं कि अब तक आपकी जीवन पद्धति को छोड़ने के लिए आपको पर्याप्त कारण नहीं मिले जो ऐसे संपर्क की पद्धति के लिए प्रतिकूल है। यह शायद ही तर्कसंगत है, ऐसा मास्टर कहते हैं। वह जो रहस्यवाद का झंडा ऊंचा उठाएगा और उसका शासन करने का दावा करेगा, उसे दूसरों के लिए मिसाल बननी होगी, आदर्श बनना होगा। वह अपने जीवन के तौर तरीकों को बदलने वाला पहला व्यक्ति होना चाहिए। विज्ञान और समाज के विरोध के बावजूद उसने आत्मविद्या के रहस्यों का अध्ययन ज्ञान की सीढ़ी के ऊपरी चरण के रूप में मानकर गर्जना करते हुए दावा करना चाहिए। ईसाई संतों मनीषियों का कहना है कि स्वर्ग का राज्य बलपूर्वक प्राप्त किया जाता है, केवल ज्ञान रूपी सशस्त्र हाथों से और जीतने या नष्ट होने को तैयार रहने से आधुनिक रहस्यवादी अपने उद्देश्यों को प्राप्त करने की आशा कर सकता है। आगे मास्टर कहते हैं, दुनिया गूढ़ शक्तियों के किसी भी चौंका देने वाले प्रमाणों के लिए अपरिपक्व थी। आप जैसे कुछ ही व्यक्ति पदार्थ के पर्दे के पीछे के मूलभूत कारणों की दुनिया को समझना चाहते हैं। अर्थात हमें केवल आपके और मिस्टर ह्यूम के बारे में विचार करने की आवश्यकता है। मिस्टर ह्यूम ने मुझे कुछ प्रश्न देकर उन शर्तों को प्रस्तुत किया जिन पर वह हमारे लिए गंभीरता से कार्य करने के लिए इच्छुक हो गए। लेकिन आप दोनों के इरादे और आकांक्षाएं बिल्कुल विपरीत स्वरूप की है, इसलिए अलग अलग परिणामों की ओर जाते हैं। इसीलिए मुझे प्रत्येक को अलग से उत्तर देना होगा। आपके प्रस्ताव को स्वीकारना या नहीं, यह मुख्यतः आपके आंतरिक उद्देश्य में निहित है, जो हमारे निर्देशों को प्राप्त करने के लिए मार्गदर्शन के लिए प्रेरित करता है। सीनेट के उद्देश्य इस प्रकार से है: स्पष्ट और निस्संदेह प्रमाण प्राप्त करने की इच्छा की प्रकृति में वास्तव में ऐसी शक्तियां हैं जिसे विज्ञान नहीं जानता। यह आशा कि उन शक्तियों को किसी दिन
Pradeep ji, unmute yourself, please. हाँ, unmute sir, unmute.
सिद्ध संघ के बारे में
Okay.
सच्चाई जानना। जिन महात्मा गणों के बारे में सब इतना कुछ सुनते हैं लेकिन दिखाई कम देते हैं, उनके अस्तित्व की सच्चाई कि वे एक विकृत मतिभ्रमित मस्तिष्क की कल्पना नहीं, इस बात का सकारात्मक आश्वासन चाहना, पुष्टि चाहना। हमारे विचारों में यह उद्देश्य एक सांसारिक दृष्टिकोण से देखने पर ईमानदार और गंभीर है, लेकिन हमें स्वार्थी प्रतीत होते हैं। मास्टर कहते हैं कि यदि आपको मेरी भाषा अशिष्ट लगती है तो क्षमा करें। हम जिनकी दुनिया आपकी दुनिया से काफी भिन्न है, उनसे आप सच्चाई जानना और उपदेश प्राप्त करने का दावा करते हैं। वे स्वार्थी प्रतीत होती है। आपको इस बात से अवगत होना चाहिए कि टीएस का मुख्य उद्देश्य व्यक्तिगत आकांक्षाओं को संतुष्ट करना नहीं, बल्कि सभी मनुष्यों की सेवा करना है। स्वार्थी, सेल्फिश यह शब्द आपको कर्णकर्कश लगे, हमारे लिए इसका विशिष्ट महत्व है। हमारे विचार में मानवता के कल्याण की उच्चतम आकांक्षाएं स्वार्थ से दूषित होती हैं। अगर परोपकारी मन में चाहे अनजाने में स्वयं के फायदे की इच्छा या नाइंसाफी की प्रवृत्ति की छाया हो, फिर भी आपने विश्व बंधुत्व। ओके, थैंक यू, नमस्ते, धन्यवाद।
So that was the session on Mahatma letter number 2 today. And I thank Brother Shikharji for his insightful explanation of this letter. And though Meenakshi ji is not present with us today, but she was still able to send the Hindi translation. So we extend our thanks to her also. And now if anybody has any questions regarding this letter, you may please unmute yourself and ask. I don't think so. We have any questions on this. This is the beginning of the communication between the Mahatmas and the two members, AP Senate and Alan Hume. So, Shikharji, would you like to add anything before we end today's session?
No, nothing. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Let us close the meeting with closing prayer.
Okay, Pradeep ji. So thank you all for attending the session today. Please stand by for the closing prayer. Om Asito Ma Satgamaya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Sarvesham Swastirabhavatu Sarvesham Shantirabhavatu सर्वेषां पूर्णं भवतु, सर्वेषां मङ्गलं भवतु, लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु, सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्ति 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 ॐ। Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shikharji.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vibhaji. So we'll meet
Thank you. Bye.
next Friday on the second chapter of this letter.
And just okay. I think.
Yes.
No, just please, if you have not registered for convention, please
Yes, yes.
register as early as possible and motivate others to register also.